be during
Y'all
tornadoes.
already know how my hair
Very tragic
is
event.
after
But
a
the worst tornado
shower.
of that year occurred on the same day, and that was the F4
Barbecue,
tornado that
pulled
hit
pork,
Belvedere,
and mashed
Illinois.
potatoes.
Unfortunately, this tornado struck a bus
Go
loading area
Zero.
at Belvedere High School right as classes were ending, and this resulted in 13 fatalities. It still remains one of the deadliest school-related tornado disasters in recorded history. Another tornado worth mentioning, and perhaps this might be the worst tornado of 1967, I'm not even sure, but there was actually an F5 tornado that hit France on June 24th.
Watching the worst tornado every year since
There's some
1950.
photos. I don't know much about this event, but it's pretty interesting that there was an F5 tornado outside of the U.S. 1965 was bad, 1966 was bad, 1967 was bad. 1968 was yet another very bad year for tornadoes. We're going through a tough streak here. There was 4 F5 tornadoes recorded in the U.S. It's a lot. And there were 131 fatalities. There's a very famous photo of Tracy, Minnesota F5 that occurred on June 13th. Perhaps you've seen it. It kind of just has a very dramatic look to it. This tornado resulted in 9 deaths. However, the main event of the season was a massive tornado outbreak that occurred on May 15th with 72 fatalities. The deadliest was an F4 that hit Jonesboro, Arkansas, resulting in 35 fatalities. And while not the deadliest, the tornado I'm picking for 1968 goes to an F5 that struck Charles City, Iowa on that same day, May 15th. This tornado was extremely powerful, carrying a massive path straight through the city. Very tragic event. Fortunately, there were only 5 fatalities, because remember, Iowans have basements, but still a terrible tornado, the worst of 1968. Also, Germany was hit by an F4, the Black Forest F4. So, yeah, not a great year. Thankfully, 1969 was a much more tame year, with only 8 F4s. There is, however, a very deadly tornado that sticks out from the rest, the Hazelhurst F4 on January 23rd, with 32 fatalities and 240 plus injuries. This tornado has like an urban legend attached to it. There's something called the boy with the pop bubble on his head. Apparently, some 12-year-old boy showed up before the tornado, told everyone, hey, there's going to be a tornado, or like something bad's going to happen to Hazelhurst, just so you know. And he had like a pop bubble on his head. I don't know. Anyway, the tornado came after he said that, and it caused a lot of harm, and then he disappeared after that. I don't know what that's all about, but that's just the urban legend. Anyway, with that, we're going to move into the 1970s with 1970. And 1970 was a moderate year for tornadoes with 8 F4s and 1 F5. There was one tornado that easily sticks out from the rest, just like in 1969.
It's weird to think about years before you were born.
And that is the 1970 Lubbock, Texas F5 tornado that occurred on May 11th with 26 fatalities. This thing was a monster. It's predicted that it had wind speeds close to 300 miles per hour. It even had a preliminary F6 rating from Fujita. Now, obviously, F6 does not exist, so it is an F5. But the fact that, he questioned it and he was like, perhaps this is an F6, just goes to show how powerful that tornado was. It was so powerful that it twisted the foundation of the Great Plains Life Building, and the remnants can still be seen today in the brick. Easily the worst tornado of 1970. Moving on to 1971, here's a map of all the tornado paths in 1971, and you can clearly see 2 tornadoes that stick out from the rest. That is an F4 in the blue and an F5 in the red, and they pretty much follow the same path. These 2 tornadoes are part of a larger 2-day outbreak on February 21st and 22nd that resulted in 123 fatalities. This F5 is known as the Inverness, Mississippi F5 with 48 deaths. That's quite a bit of casualties for an F5 tornado, and I think not many people have talked about this event. Maybe it's one of the forgotten F5 tornadoes, but a very violent tornado, a very tragic event. Post office was gone, local bank was destroyed, the city hall was destroyed, so many homes were destroyed. There was also a lot of deaths because it primarily hit low-income housing, so the buildings weren't like the most strongly built buildings ever. So that's unfortunate. But fortunately, after a pretty much 6-year streak of bad years, we get a relatively tame year in 1972 with only 4 F4s and 36 fatalities. Obviously, 36 fatalities is not good. I'm not trying to say that those are bad, but compared to other years, this was a more tame year. This was kind of a year of rare tornadoes in unlikely locations. There was an F3 in Arizona. What? Arizona? There was another very deadly tornado that hit Florida on June 18th with 6 fatalities. And this was also an F3. But the tornado of the year goes to the super rare Pacific Northwest Oregon Washington F3 on April 5th. This specifically hit the cities of Portland and Vancouver. A rare tornado indeed. 1973 was a somewhat moderate year for tornadoes. There were 2 F5s, the Valley Mills, Texas F5 on May 6th. There were no fatalities with that tornado. They hit a couple of barns, and apparently that was enough for the people to survey it and go, yeah, F5. There was also the legendary San Justo F5 in Argentina, which is my pick for 1973. This resulted in 63 fatalities, and apparently it was red. So the buildings in this city were made of red brick, and when the tornado destroyed these buildings, it pulverized it into like red dust. So it was a red tornado. Definitely pretty terrifying. But we do need an honorable mention for 1973, and that is the Union City, Oklahoma F4. It was huge for tornado research. The Tornado Intercept program was successful because of this event. It led to advances in radar technology and Doppler technology, which eventually led to longer lead times for taking
So
shelter.
interesting.
So yeah, definitely a good tornado. Indirectly probably saved many lives. But we're still sticking with the San Justo tornado for that year. Well, we made it to 1974, perhaps the worst year on record for tornadoes. One could make an argument for 2011. They were both very bad, but this year has the infamous super outbreak, the largest tornado outbreak on record that occurred on April 3rd and 4th. The second largest tornado outbreak on record. I think the 2011 one was actually worse. But this one did have more F5s. 7 F5s. That's so many. That's crazy. We haven't had an F5 since 2013, and this year had 7 alone. This outbreak had 7 alone. The worst of the year comes from that outbreak, and it's the Xena, Ohio F5 with 34 deaths. This tornado, just like the Lubbock, Texas tornado, was given a preliminary rating of an F6 by Ted Fujita, with predicted wind speeds around 305 miles per hour. Truly a violent monster. Those are the only 2 tornadoes to ever have a preliminary rating of F6. One of the first tornadoes ever of a tornado was the Xena F5, captured by a 16-year-old by the name of Bruce Boyd. Nixon also visited Xena, and he said, out of all the disasters that he had ever seen, Xena was on a whole nother level. Thankfully, there would be no F5s in 1975, but there were still 11 F4s. And that's not great. The second worst and deadliest was the March 28th Warren, Arkansas F4 with 7 deaths. But the tornado of that year is again in Mississippi, specifically Macomb on January 10th. This F4 tornado was part of the Great Storm of 1975. There was also a blizzard. It was a wild day in weather history. Moving on to 1976. So 1976 was kind of a good year and kind of a bad year at the same time. There was fortunately not any super deadly tornadoes. But there were 3 F5s. The March 26th Spiro, Oklahoma F5 with 2 deaths.
That
The
was good.
1976 Brownwood, Texas F5 with 11 injuries. The rating is a little disputed
Wish me
on
luck
that one.
tomorrow.
And then, of course, there's